Hey man, yo kakampe Africano.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Conversations in Black. I'm Jordy Quilu, your host. Thank you for tuning in back. Today we have a special guest, Mr. Greg Fergus, MP, Liberal MP from All-Helmer, and also a parliamentary secretary to the president of the Treasury Board and the Minister of Digital Government. But most importantly for our purposes is the chair of the Parliamentary Black Caucus of Canada. So we have agreed with Mr. Fergus that we'll have this conversation in both languages, so French and English, so that both of our Anglophone and Francophone viewers can take advantage of these conversations. So alors, pour cet invité, pour cette conversation, nous avons monsieur Greg Fergus, qui est député libéral, la circonscription de All-Helmer au Québec. Et puis, il est aussi secrétaire parlementaire du président du Conseil du Trésor et de la ministre du gouvernement numérique. Mais le plus important pour nos fins à nous, c'est qu'il est président du Caucus des parlementaires Noirs du Canada. Et au cours de cette conversation, on va parler de beaucoup de sujets sur l'implication des Canadiens Noirs dans le processus politique du pays. Nous allons aussi parler du racisme systémique, la discrimination, tout ça et comment on peut faire ensemble pour essayer de trouver des solutions. Alors sans plus tarder, je vais souhaiter la bienvenue et dire merci à M. Fergus d'avoir accepté notre invitation.
Et ça me fait vraiment plaisir d'être ici parmi vous aujourd'hui. Puis merci d'avoir entamé cette série de discussions avec des activistes et militants parmi les communautés noires à travers le Canada.
Ouais, merci beaucoup. Alors, d'entrée de jeu, on va commencer en français. On pose toujours la question lorsqu'on a un homme politique de savoir pourquoi vous avez choisi la politique comme forme de vous impliquer dans votre communauté, pour votre pays. Je veux dire, on peut faire autre chose, mais vous avez choisi spécifiquement la politique. Pourquoi ce choix-là?
Depuis bas âge, j'ai fait le lien entre l'importance de poursuivre des idées importantes, mais pour faire réaliser, pour faire concrétiser ces idées-là, il faut passer à l'action. Et j'ai trouvé que la politique, ça c'est la forme dans notre système de prendre les idées qui existent dans la société puis de les traduire en des actions concrètes. Et nous, parce que nous vivons dans une démocratie, on a la possibilité, tous et chacun, tous et toutes, la possibilité à contribuer à la vie publique. Et au fil des années, la politique active m'interpellait. Puis en 2014, j'ai eu la chance de me présenter à l'investiture dans ma communauté de presque 30 ans, parce que je suis natif de Montréal, mais je suis venu ici dans la région de la capitale nationale pour faire mes études universitaires, puis j'ai jamais quitté. Alors, ma famille grandit là et c'était vraiment ma communauté. Puis la circonscription était libre et j'avais la chance de lancer ma campagne. Puis heureusement, tout d'abord, les militants libéraux ont eu confiance en moi. Et deuxièmement, dans l'élection générale, mes concitoyens de All-Helmer m'ont donné le privilège d'occuper ce siège temporairement, on devrait dire, mais d'occuper ce siège en tant que leur représentant.
Parfait. Ben, ça me fait une bonne transition quand vous parlez du Québec, vous êtes natif de Montréal, moi aussi je grandis à Montréal. Et malheureusement, ces derniers temps, on a vu après des rapports qui sont sortis, même avec la police de la ville de Montréal, sur le profilage racial, sur d'autres, on voit ça, la discrimination à l'emploi, etc. Mais nous avons les hautes autorités politique de la province qui continue toujours à nier le fait même qu'il y aurait le racisme systémique au Québec. Et plus spécifiquement, là maintenant, il tourne ça comme un genre d'arme politique en disant que ben, s'il y a le systémique racisme au Québec, ça veut dire que tous les Québécois sont racistes. So, j'aimerais savoir c'est quoi votre
Et,
opinion là-dessus.
mais ça me dépasse énormément. Puis plusieurs de ces instances gouvernementales du Québec, puis on doit dire les vraies choses. On parle du premier ministre du Québec, monsieur Legault, qui nie l'existence du racisme systémique au Québec. Moi, je comprends pas. Même si les agences, l'appareil gouvernemental du Québec admettent l'existence du racisme systémique, de la discrimination systémique, il faut faire la part des choses. Systémique, ça ne veut pas dire systématique.
Mhm.
Systémique veut dire qu'il y a des préjugés inconscients qui existent. Et quand on met, et ça c'est par rapport à l'individu, et quand on met toutes les décisions ensemble que ces individus vont prendre, on va avoir des résultats qui clochent. Euh, on a vu ça avec la diversité dans la fonction publique québécoise. Euh, la population ou pourcentage des postes qui sont occupés par, disons-le, juste les minorités visibles. Moi, je parle même pas des Noirs, mais
Mhm.
les minorités visibles
Dans leur ensemble, yeah.
dans toute sa grandeur. Euh, euh, on est loin de poids démographique qui existe au Québec. Euh, et c'est pas parce que les gens sont racistes, loin de là. C'est juste chaque fois qu'on voit quelqu'un comme vous et moi qui sont des Noirs, on assume qu'on ne parle pas français.
Mhm.
On assume que nous ne sommes pas des Québécois depuis des générations. Et dans mon cas, c'est vrai, je suis la première génération de ma famille à être né au Québec, au Canada. Euh, mais il y a des Noirs qui ont été ici depuis avant que le Québec soit le Québec.
C'est ça.
Et puis on était présents et on a fait face à l'époque à la discrimination formelle. On sait bien que l'esclavage a continué jusqu'en 1834. On sait bien que des lois ou des pratiques qui niaient la pleine participation citoyenne des Noirs existaient jusqu'en plein milieu du 20e siècle. Et les conséquences de ces préjugés ont continué. Ce sont exactement ces conséquences que moi, j'invoque le concept de la discrimination systémique. Alors, ça existe. Il faut dire des choses comme elles sont si on veut vraiment aborder et résoudre cette question. Et c'est dommage que je crois que peut-être dans son cœur, il admet l'existence du racisme systémique, mais pour des raisons, pour des fins politiques, il ne
Mhm.
veut pas, il veut pas prendre le temps pour éduquer les personnes qui font qui confondent le racisme systémique avec le racisme systématique.
Yeah. Mais je crois que c'est ça aussi, parce qu'on le voit, c'est même au point de vue fédéral, je le vois avec plusieurs députés du bloc, malheureusement, lorsqu'ils ont posé la question, et puis c'était le déni total. Et moi, je pense que c'est pas une approche productive, dans le sens où c'est mieux lorsqu'on reconnaît, puis après, il faut avoir des actions concrètes là-dessus. Alors, ben, je sais pas, selon vous, qu'est-ce qu'on pourrait faire spécifiquement au point de vue juste citoyen à citoyen pour nos concitoyens du Québec, citoyens à citoyens, Pour le dire que oui, il y a beaucoup de choses qui se sont faites, il y a eu beaucoup d'améliorations et je suis même très fier, surtout de ma génération. Il y a d'autres qui fait, on est plus conscient, mais quand même, on parle plus, comme vous allez dire, non systématique, mais systémique dans les sphères, surtout dans les sphères du pouvoir.
Oui, il faut prendre avantage la situation avec certains leaders qui ne nient pas l'existence du racisme systémique. Alors, je pense plutôt comme la mairesse Valérie Plante de Montréal, le maire de ma communauté, Maxime Pedneau-Jobin. Il y en a plusieurs. Je pense que Régis Lebaume aussi admettent l'existence du racisme systémique. Peut-être c'est là qu'on devrait entamer la discussion. Certainement avec mes collègues fédéraux, libéraux, on peut avoir cette discussion-là et j'imagine que c'est la même chose avec l'NPD, le représentant du NPD et probablement quelques bloquistes aussi. Mais comme j'ai dit, c'est dommage que sur ce sujet-là, qui est tellement important, qu'il n'y a pas de couleur politique là-dessus, qu'on décide de jouer la politique. Il faut pas. Il faut prendre ça au sérieux. Quand on avait créé le Caucus parlementaire des Noirs, c'est non partisan. Tout le monde laisse leur couleur partisane à la porte et nous poursuivons les intérêts des communautés noires à travers le Canada. Et je pense que ça a bien fonctionné jusqu'à date.
Yeah, perfect. So now we will transition to English, if you don't mind.
No problem.
So since you're talking about the Parliamentary Black Caucus of Canada, back in June, I believe it was, you guys released a call to action, and you had 5 specific steps that we can take to address the issue, especially at the governmental level with different structure. I like to call it structure of power, so that to reflect the realities of everyday, Black Canadians and also Indigenous Canadians. So I don't know if you can talk more specifically about those 5 concrete steps that we can take in order to addressing this issue of anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism and systemic racism in Canada.
Yeah, so the statement came, if I can just give a little bit of a story around it before I get into the 5 specifics. We created the statement after the emergence of those 3 videos that came out in short order at the end of May, beginning of June. The Ahmaud Arbery murder, assassination, I should say. The Christian Cooper threat of institutional violence in New York City Central Park, and then of course what most people have seen was the brutal slaying of George Floyd in the United States. And when you had those 3 statements come out of in a row, it was really, I think, an eye-opener for most people that racism just isn't something that happens and it's unfortunate. It was very clear, and people saw it, live on tape, that racism kills. And so, faced with that, and faced especially with the George Floyd murder, where you really you can come out of that just feeling, just what is my self-worth as a Black person? Because obviously my life is not valued. My life doesn't seem to matter to some folks, and you can't stay in that negative spot. And so there was a real sense at the Black Caucus that not only must we make a statement, but we need to map out a way forward and on the things that need to be adjusted and need to be addressed for us to be able to get rid of this scourge of systemic racism. So we identified 5 big issues. First is for us to have data. the importance of disaggregated data. Too often, the reality of Black Canadians is hidden within the framework of visible minority. We think that we're doing everything fine on visible minority, not realizing that some people are doing better than others. And next to Indigenous peoples, Blacks have the worst results. So those are the things that we need data so that we can help change things. You can't change things that you can't measure. So let's start measuring them. The second thing that we wanted to do is that we wanted to make the case again that because of systemic discrimination, because of the informal barriers that we've had over the years, informal economic barriers, Blacks have not been able to play their role in creating prosperity in this country. So we were looking for specific measures that we can help Black people, Black entrepreneurs, create that wealth and to partner with each other to create that wealth so that we can create jobs, not only for our own community, but for all of Canada and for all Canadians. We want to play that role, and to do that, we have to overcome the barriers that have been set down in the past. Thirdly, and it will be no surprise, we had to talk about justice and public safety issues and a number of issues, steps that we need to take to make the administration of justice and the representation of justice more equitable, so that we are not subject to a much greater scrutiny than other communities are. And let me just, if you don't mind, just give you a bit of an example. Studies have shown that Blacks or Indigenous peoples are no more likely to commit a crime than non-Blacks and non-Indigenous peoples. Yet, when you take a look at the police records, for the ones that we do keep, and certainly prison records that we keep at the federal level, we note that Blacks and Indigenous, well, let's start with Blacks, we're 3 to 4 times more likely to get arrested, remanded, imprisoned, and our sentences, which we have, are longer sentences. Yet, we're no more apt to create a crime than anybody else. So that leads to that uncomfortable question: what's going on? Why are we being targeted? Why are we assumed to be more likely to engage in a criminal activity? Those are those tough questions that we have to have. And if it's bad for us, for Indigenous peoples, it's even worse. They're 7 to 8 times more likely than their demographic weight in the population to be arrested, remanded, and imprisoned. So we have to have a real good look at our system, and we have a series of recommendations on that front. The fourth issue, which we took a look at, is saying, to make our we want to use the administration of or our public service as an example. Whereas we have, we sort of meet the right visible minority numbers, we match up pretty close to the population at the federal level, at least. About 23% of Canada is composed of visible minorities, and about 19% of the federal public service is composed of visible minorities. But so it's almost close. It's not quite right, but it's getting there. It's a lot closer than many other public services. And you mentioned, as we spoke earlier, about the Quebec Public Service needs to do a better job. But the higher you go up the ranks of the public service, the more homogenous is the population. And that will just that's just not right. We're not making policies that are reflective of the Canadian population. We're not thinking about, because we don't have as much access to people who see things differently. So if you want to have a resilient it's introducing policy everybody wants, then we have to make sure that throughout the public service, the bottom to the top, that it's representative of all of Canada. So that's where we want to do that, and we hope that would be an incentive for other organizations to do this in the private sector as well as in the public sector. And finally, our fifth thing is to really recognize the contributions that Black Canadians have made to our culture and to our heritage, and that these are important investments in which to make, because we have been part of Canada's culture and heritage since there was before Canada. So that helps us also change the hearts and minds of people about how they see their Black brothers and sisters.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, I'll push back a little bit because
Yeah, go
you're a
ahead.
liberal member of parliament, so you guys are in power.
Mhm.
And what do you see this sense of when we see liberals, especially, we have this idea of empty symbolism and token allyship, if I can use that word, or like you guys are big on talks but light on actions. For example, when you guys released the call to act on specific steps, the prime minister like welcomed the approach but without committing to any particular measure, and he said, I'll quote, he said, "We are committed to moving forward with several measures."
Mhm.
I mean, that's very pretty vague because like you've been there, and there's no concrete policy actions, but you guys are in government, been in government since 2015, could have done something. And also, especially talking about the prime minister, we felt a little bit that many of the Black MPs, sort of gave him a free pass with the issue of blackface, when it happened several occasions. So just that idea of you guys are in power, you can do something specific. Granted, yes, that was from the Black Caucus and it's nonpartisan, but then the liberals and they want equity, diversity, inclusion. So I think this was an opportunity to come up with concrete policies instead of just yes, kneeling, yes, recognizing there is systemic racism, and that's a good thing, that's a first step, but we want action too, especially
Okay.
from the higher ups.
So there's a lot packed into that question statement. So let's start from the very beginning. So first of all, we have a track record, and it is a good track record. When we came into government, um, we reversed a decision of the previous government that didn't allow a UN body to come in to assess the state of people of African descent in this country. The previous government didn't even allow them to come into Canada to do an assessment. Well, we reversed that almost immediately. They came in, produced their report, and the report was released in the fall of 2017. Within a couple of months of that, Black Caucus did a number of things. First of all, we worked on, we took advantage of the opportunity to put a Canadian woman on a Canadian banknote. And we put on Viola Desmond, who was an African Nova Scotian, who became an African Nova Scotian civil rights activist in 1945, and saw no justice in her lifetime, but has since been seen to be a person who really started putting the issue on the map, on the political agenda. I know that's symbolic, but it's an important first step, and one which then starts opening up a whole bunch of other opportunities. After that, shortly afterwards, the Prime Minister became first of all, accepted the UN decade for African descent. So the Prime Minister became the first one to recognize the existence of anti-Black racism. Never before has that been done by a Prime Minister, and he engaged to make to take some action on that front, and we did. And that budget in 2018, we saw the first ever investment in a federal budget for Black Canadians. And then we followed that up in 2019 with a second budget with even more investments which were directed at Black Canadians on talking about disaggregating data, starting to work on that. B, setting up an anti-discrimination directorate, an anti-racism directorate. 3, starting a program of several multi-year program to support Black community groups in providing them with programming dollars as well as capital expenses. So we did, and I also forget, we did work on the mental health issue, because we know that racism, where blacks face greater mental health issues because of racism, because of anti-black racism, and living with that, and living with those microaggressions and macroaggressions. So there were historic investments for the first time, and that was in our first mandate. You're right, the issue of blackface came up. And the reason why I felt comfortable supporting the Prime Minister, because in the absence of knowing that, the Prime Minister acted on almost every one of the recommendations that Black Caucus had suggested to him in the first mandate, including the issues which I just raised before, starting from the UN decade to the federal budget investments. So if he had no record and no track record as being supportive of the community, then I would have found it very difficult to support him in what I saw as an era of youth. But because he did have that, I felt very comfortable. Well, very comfortable. I'd rather that he had not done it. He rather that he had not done it as well. But he did. And we got to leave room for people to grow and to change in their lives. If not, if we demand purity from people from the very beginning of their lives to the very end of their lives, we're going to find ourselves with very few allies. So we need to build allyship, and we need for people to learn and to grow from their experiences of having that unconscious bias, of having practiced perhaps unwittingly systemic discrimination, and helping them grow to become allies and supporters and fighters against racism and supporters of greater diversity in our country. And I think the Prime Minister has shown that. Now, we get to this summer, and when the Prime Minister took the knee and made a statement saying that he was, after we had released our statement, saying that he would be very supportive of it. Now, I can't scoop my own government, but I'm really quite convinced that quite shortly and throughout this fall, you're going to be seeing a series of measures which are going to respond directly to the issues which the Parliamentary Black Caucus had raised. So things take time to make them stick and to make them work. And we have been busy, and I know I've been busy, working with Ahmed Hussein, Canada's only black cabinet minister, and other ministers, in making sure that we're bringing about the changes on the issues, the 5 big areas that we had raised. And I feel pretty confident that we're going to see a series of measures taken. And I would, politicians should never do this, but I feel so confident that I can judge us at the end of this mandate as to what we did, and did we follow through on the issues which have been highlighted by the Parliamentary Black Caucus.
Perfect. But just to follow up, that issue also, if we look at within the Liberal Party itself or the PMO, office, would like also to see that inclusion, diversity, especially the place for Black Canadians, also reflected. I mean, when I look at the higher ups, the circle of part within the Liberal Party, I don't see much diversity in there, or the PMO office staff and stuff like that. Those are also, concrete steps that, that can be taken.
Again, I think you have to take a look. If you take a look at ministerial offices, if you take a look at MP offices, you have seen a clear improvement in this mandate as opposed to the last mandate. And we did, I'm a glass half full kind of guy. So we hit historic highs in the first mandate. We've gone even further in this mandate in terms of having people of color, especially Black Canadians, who occupy leadership roles in the political side of government. and I think it's been quite important. It's under this prime minister that on the administrative side in the public service that we've seen 2 Black Canadians now reach the level of associate deputy minister. That's not been done before. So we are working hard to go even further. And like I said, if you're patient with me, I think by the time that we seek a new mandate, you'll be able to point out and say, yeah, you know what? They did say they did this. They actually did walk the talk.
I'll hold you up on that.
Please do.
I will come back and follow up and remind you of that. Well, thank you for that. But just to sort of land then here, moving forward in terms of, because we're still a political action, committee, and we want more Black Canadians, especially young Black Canadians, to be involved, participate. In terms what we can do to get involved with the parliamentary Black Caucus, or in terms of what advice, sage advice you might have for young Black Canadians wanting to be involved more in the political arena, because I always say it's never about really politics, it's about public service. Though sometimes, politicians are not recognized for doing a public service. But if they want to be public servant, but just in an elected form, what
That's right.
advice you can have for us moving forward?
Well, the advice which I would have is it's 2 things. Don't let anybody tell you can't do it. So that's key. Just do it. And if you tumble and fall, just get up again and continue going at it. So that's the first thing. The second thing, which I would say, is try to figure out where you find yourself on the spectrum. There was a really interesting article written last week in the New York Times talking about the role of revolutionaries or conservative radicals.
Was it by Mr. Brooks, I think?
Yes, you read it.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. So I thought it was really fascinating because you have, I'm the guy. My personality is the person who say, okay, well, I want to translate for the system to save itself.
Okay.
There needs to be changes, and I'm the kind of fellow who wants to make those changes happen. There are other people who are better at identifying what the weaknesses are, but they're not the ones who are going to make the things happen. So we need the revolutionaries. And as chair of Black Caucus, people always ask me, what can I do? And I keep, they say, how can I help you? And I say, well, there's 2 things you can help me, get the message out, but also keep pushing hard, keep demanding, make it so that, it requires me to, it keeps pushing me in the back. And it allows me to say, look, you see these changes which are being asked for, we got to translate them into concrete actions. So how do we do that? And my work is less, it's less rewarding, I suppose, in terms of, public adulation, but it's the stuff that makes things happen and makes progress happen. And those are the changes which we need to have. So, I encourage young people who are watching this, please, if you are, a revolutionary, keep at it. Keep at it. Don't stop, because that's how change really does happen. And if you're ones who see what the problem is, and you can identify a number of steps of how to make that real, well, be part of the people who implement those changes. But both groups, we all recognize that we have to change the system. Is that the system as it has existed wasn't doing it for us. So things have to change. Let's make those changes reality.
Well, thank you very much. So pretty much that inside, outside strategy, not either or, but both end, right? Just
Yeah,
like saying
there
people
are
from the
lots of
outside pushing and people from the inside, I think,
yeah,
doing
and
the groundwork.
that's right. There's some people from the outside who say, never trust anybody on the inside, and there are people on the inside who don't want to do anything, right? They like, oh, why don't people just be happy? And I think it's important to recognize you require both. You need the Malcolm X's, but you need the Martin Luther Kings, right? You need both. And I think the genius of those two gentlemen who I just mentioned is the fact that they, late in their lives, they came to an understanding that both were necessary.
Well, thank you very much for accepting this conversation. We're clearly, like I said, we'll come back. Once you guys will come back from the prorogation of Parliament, I'll definitely follow up to see how you guys are doing on that front. So once again, thank you, and
It's a real pleasure.
we appreciate you for what you're doing. If we don't tell you enough, thank you for being from the inside.
That's not the point. The point is to make life better for Black Canadians, and as a result, making life better for all Canadians.
All right. Well, that's it for us, guys. We'll have another conversation with another politician, another Black Canadian, and how we as a group, we as a country can change things and move forward. So we'll see you next. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Hey man, yo kakampe.